Hello, health champions. Today I want to talk about the most harmful foods that people keep eating. Now, some of you might be expecting a video to sensationalize some obscure food with a hidden poison, like a fish or a mushroom or something. But the foods I'm talking about are actually thousands of times more dangerous. They claim thousands of times more lives than some fish or some mushroom. And these are all the foods that cause insulin resistance, that cause nutritional deficiencies, that cause dysbiosis, leaky gut, and autoimmune disease, and that cause chronic low-grade inflammation. And the reason we need to take these very seriously is that they affect the majority of the world's population today. We have insulin resistance, probably somewhere between 50 and 80% of the world's population. Nutritional deficiencies, it's probably everyone, but more a matter of to what degree do we have these nutritional deficiencies. Dysbiosis, an imbalance in your gut microbes, it's probably over 90%. And a good percentage of that, maybe 30, 40, 50%, probably have some degree of leaky gut. And autoimmune disease is something that's exploding in recent years. And officially, it's probably somewhere around 1 in 10 in the world that have an autoimmune disease. In the US, it's 1 in 7, or about 14, 15%. But that's a very, very underestimated number because it is very rarely tested for. So the only people they know about are the ones that they've actually performed antibody tests. And in my clinic, where we actually check everybody for thyroid antibodies for starters, I think that it's above 30%. And when it comes to chronic low-grade inflammation, it probably goes hand in hand with insulin resistance, that it is most people that have some degree of low-grade inflammation. It's just a matter of to what degree do we have it. But even though these 4 factors are responsible for most degenerative disease and most suffering and deaths today, we don't take them seriously enough because they don't kill us fast enough. If an animal eats something poisonous, they get sick, and they know to stay away from that food in the future. But these things take decades to kill us, and that's why we have such a hard time to pay attention to them. So let's dig a little deeper in the first one, which is insulin resistance. And of course, sugary foods and sugary drinks are the worst. And these include things like soda, sweet tea, energy drinks, coffee drinks with sugar that are popular, and also fruit juice. And then on the solid food part, we have all kinds of snacks. We have candy, we have baked goods, we have breakfast cereals, food bars, etc. And all these things that contain added sugar are extra bad because they do 2 things. They have one part that is glucose, which raises blood sugar and raises insulin and makes us insulin resistant. But the other part is the fructose. 50% of these things with added sugar are fructose that can only be metabolized by the liver and therefore will quickly overwhelm the liver, cause non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, make the liver insulin resistant, and now that kind of spreads to the rest of the body as well. So anything with added sugar is double bad. And then number 2 here on the list is high glycemic foods. So these are foods that are high in starch, but that don't have added sugar. So they don't have any fructose, but they're very high in glucose. And here we have things like potato and rice and flour, especially processed flour. But here we need to understand that some people can have a modest amount of all of these, and some people can have a moderate amount of high glycemic foods. It depends on where you are on the metabolic spectrum. If you have a metabolic disease, if you're insulin resistant, if you have type 2 diabetes, and you're on the red end of the spectrum as far as insulin resistance goes, then you want to completely avoid anything with added sugar. And you want to be very, very careful with any high glycemic foods. Whereas If you are very insulin sensitive, then you can probably tolerate a little bit more, but I wouldn't go crazy with it. Number 3 is artificial sweeteners, and that's kind of ironic because they were made to be a substitute for sugar. So we know sugar raises blood sugar and insulin, but these were supposed to be the opposite of that. They were supposed to be non-caloric and not raise blood sugar at all. But instead what they do, and this is, we're talking about aspartame and sucralose, which are the two biggest sellers right now, they dysregulate insulin signaling. And they also reduce the amount of keystone bacterial species. So they affect the microbiome flora. They affect the balance and therefore further dysregulate insulin signaling, because some of that also comes from the gut microbes. And in doing that, these non-caloric, these artificial sweeteners actually promote dysbiosis and insulin resistance. Under the heading of nutrient deficiencies, we have almost all the foods that we're talking about here, but one interesting example is trans fats, and I'm bringing up a few things that people probably haven't heard of, that trans fats will reduce the cell membrane absorption. They affect the cell membrane signaling in the body, and therefore you lose your ability to absorb some of the nutrients. They also reduce enzyme activity, and enzymes are what you make, what your body makes to break down food so that you can absorb it, and trans fats will interfere with that function as well. Furthermore, trans fats are known to increase inflammations. And trans fats, of course, are when we use vegetable oils, we use plant oils, we process them very harshly, so it's a bad oil to start with, but then we bombard it with hydrogen under high heat and high pressure. And now we turn them into something called margarine or shortening, but sometimes it's still a little bit liquid, especially if they use them for frying oils, and these trans fats are basically one step away from plastic. Number 5 is food additives and preservatives, and there's hundreds and hundreds of these, and they have different types of effects, but among these are that they interfere with digestion, they bind nutrients sometimes. So if they bind to the nutrients that your body wants, then you can't absorb them because they're already bound to something. And they also disrupt the gut microbes. They further promote dysbiosis, which again means you can't digest and process foods as well. Next category is biome disruptors and inflammation. And as you probably have noticed here, there's a huge amount of overlap between all these categories, but on these last two, there's so much overlap, I put them together. And we already talked about additives and preservatives. We're not going to count them again. We talked about sugar and high fructose corn syrup and white flour that also do biome disruption and promote inflammation. But next we have number 6 is mainstream processed meats. So we're talking about sausages and bacon and things like that. Now, it's not the meat in itself that is necessarily bad. I don't think it's the best form of meat, but if it's processed naturally, if they don't add a bunch of preservatives and nitrates and sugar and other chemicals, then it can still be a good thing to eat. So when we're talking about these things being bad, it's primarily the chemicals and the additives in there that are bad for you. Number 7 is fried foods. And the reason these are so bad is that they use very bad oils to start with, these harshly processed plant oils. And then from all the heat and all the processing, they further oxidize these oils and damage them. And they're also very high in omega-6. When that ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 gets way out of balance, now that becomes a pro-inflammatory factor in itself. So furthermore, they damage the lining of your intestinal tract and it increases inflammation. And just like almost everything else, it also disrupts your gut microbiome. It reduces the keystone species, and with the inflammation, it disrupts the balance down there. Number 8 is energy drinks. And what they have found is that The combination of high levels of sugar and caffeine is extra damaging, and it will increase inflammation, it will damage your gut lining, it will alter your bacterial balance. Number 9 is excess alcohol, which again will damage your gut lining, it will increase inflammation, it will contribute to leaky gut, and also this alcohol, because it's just like fructose, can only be processed by the liver, it will dramatically increase your risk of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, especially if you consume it at the same time that you're eating sugar, and therefore it will also increase insulin resistance. And number 10 on the list is all ultra-processed foods. And this is basically anything in a package, anything that has a long shelf life, anything that's processed in the store. So we have 60 to 70% of the calories consumed in the United States are ultra-processed foods. And the US was the first and the worst when it comes to this, but it is really, really sad to see how the rest of the world is catching up very, very quickly. Even if where you live is not at 60, 70%, it is getting there much, much too fast. And you can probably see how these factors keep coming back for most of the foods we talk about. So again, we have insulin resistance, which processed foods cause this from all the sugar and all the starch and all the bad oils that it contains. We have nutritional deficiencies, which of course happen from processed foods because we remove most of the nutrients when we process a food. The nutrients are the things that go bad. So they take away the essential fatty acids, they take away the vitamins and the minerals and the fiber in order to give the product a longer shelf life. And therefore we tend to eat more, so we get some of these nutrients in our bodies, and now we end up overeating. That's where overfed and undernourished comes from. Then we have dysbiosis, leaky gut, just like we talked about. All of the sugar and the preservatives and the artificial sweeteners cause the dysbiosis. And of course, chronic inflammation, which is associated with insulin resistance, as well as all of these oxidized components and all the additives. So I wanted to break it down like this for you so that you see what these components are and you realize that it's not really all that complicated. That if you just eat meat and vegetables, you eat whole unprocessed foods, you cook at home for yourself, then you have already handled 90% of the problem. If you enjoyed this video, you're going to love that one. And if you truly want to master health by understanding how the body really works, make sure you subscribe, hit that bell, and turn on all the notifications so you never miss a life-saving video.